Hello, everyone. It's 1 o'clock, so we're going to kick off the rest of the afternoon. Thank you so much for coming to this, our first sold-out event. So we actually had to turn a couple of people away at the door, so it's amazing. Thank you all so much for coming. We have 4 new members today: Lilita Tannis, Andres and Ilse Lidums, and Viestur Steins. Again. So before I get into the program, reminder to everybody that Datsa Weinberga is at the back of the room for 1 more week at 11 o'clock to take your old Latvian, Estonian, whatever photos for scanning. So please bring them in. We had a couple people in today, and they're making a big Latvian-Canadian virtual museum, which we really need your photos for. This is, as you know, a First Thursday, which happens every first Thursday, program in English and Chef Inglo's lunch. The next one will be on March the 5th, which will be fraud prevention with a police officer in uniform and someone from NBCU. So I actually did get scammed on Facebook by what I thought was Canadian Tire a little while ago. So this is going to be all about how not to get defrauded like that. And meanwhile, you can also gear up for regular non-First Thursdays. On March 5th, we have one of our servers today, Mark McNamara, will be giving a talk and a performance. And on February the 12th, it will be Fritz Krisberg's Paukošana. I can't remember how to say that in English. Fencing, thank you. Okay, so I can always tell when an event is growing because the spreadsheet really grows. So this is kind of like our air traffic control spreadsheet. We have 22 people involved today in this, including 8 who are here just for this event, our special guests, the pouring team, and event support. If you guys could all stand up, that would be great. They're in black and they've been serving wine, and thank you so much. We also have our regular crew, which includes tech control, hall decoration and setup, lunch planning, our chef and baker, and a behind-the-scenes galley team. And we also had crew at the door, and we have the TLPA board, kind of just making sure that, that no alarms are going off. So thank you to everybody. So our guest for the day is Zinta Steprāns. This event has been on my mind for a while. It started, I think, in Tervet, when Zinta was presenting on wines there. And then there was a plan for an event here at the Latvian Center, which didn't quite take off, but the idea stayed with me. Last year at Shmi, which is the elegantu event, Zinta presented on wine, and I reached out right after, and she said, yeah, I'd be happy to do it. We have a very interesting relationship with elegantu, which is like for the youngest part of the generation, like, or the Latvian community, which is, I think, 18 to 30, and we're like, what, I don't know, we have some 25-year-olds, but generally maybe 60 and up. So they look at our programs to get ideas, and we look at their programs to get ideas, which is quite interesting. And by the way, Shmi is on March 6th and 7th this year. Everybody is invited to the gallery opening on the Friday, and they usually have some interesting presentations like Zinta on the Saturday. So while I was researching, Zinta's in that previous picture, Zinta's in there. Where is she? She's standing by the table. There she is. Opening wine. So while I was researching this event, I came across 2 Toronto life stories. The first one is the Supper Club, Meet the City's competitive cabal of, I think that's Sipper Club. I'm sorry, Sipper Club. Okay, and what they say there is, it's from 2011. It says, the new wave includes a couple of sommeliers and Zinta Steprāns. More and more, these sommeliers also manage the floor, ensuring that service runs smoothly. Then in 2012, there was another article in Toronto Life, Pop-Up Madness, and there it said, each course came with unusual wine pairings from Zinta Steprāns, who, in a t-shirt and jeans, gave the sommelier gig an effortless air. A dish of Lavelle trout and beef tongue must have been the challenge to match, but she nailed it with Bulgarian Domaine Boyar Chardonnay. So that's who we have presenting today. Right now, or currently, Zinta is a sommelier and wine agent with The Living Vine, And she actually came to being a sommelier. When she started university, she was studying philosophy and photography, and then she traveled, and then she decided to choose between scuba diving and wine. So fortunately she chose wine. So please join me in welcoming Zinta to the podium.
Hello. Sorry, let me just get that out of the way. Okay, here we are. So when Mara approached me, that's okay? Yeah? Can everybody hear? You can hear in the back? Okay. Yeah. When Mara approached me, I was like, of course, yes, I'm happy to do a wine tasting. And then she said, can we talk about wine in the Baltics? And my knowledge of wine in the Baltics is non-existent. I mean, I've had some rhubarb wine from Latvia, and that is about it. So it was actually quite an interesting thing to talk about and look at, and I just started exploring on the internet, and here is what I learned. The history of wine in the Baltics is minimal. I don't know about Estonia and Lithuania. There was really no information that came up immediately. I'm sure if you dug deeper, there might be something. But in Latvia, we have Sabila, which is, by the coat of arms, has a nice history with wine. Sabila is this hill that the Germans in the 14th century started planting wine on. You can see from the coat of arms that this became really a recognized place in Latvia. It is sort of like a sandier soil and a hill that's about 33 meters above us river. And when you think about wineries on rivers, we often think of Germany, or we think of the Loire Valley. And so this makes a lot of sense. In Germany also, when we think of wineries, we think of these beautiful rolling hills. So Sabila, not as high as the German hills, not as steep as the German hills. And I don't know how well the wines ever did, but they were exported even in the 16th century, which says that they had some recognition, and they were definitely making something that people wanted to drink, which is quite exciting. Of course, with Latvia's history, the wineries were abandoned, and nothing was made there for quite a while until Kārlis Ulmanis decided to bring back, during the freedom of Latvia, sort of what they were known for in Sabila. And so he decided to replant these grapes again. And I'm not sure exactly what they were planting at that time, but the interest in the area grew. And even in 1939, I believe, in Jelgava, they had an exhibit just to showcase the grapes of Latvia. In World War II, it became a research station, was forgotten about, and then it wasn't until 1989 that there was some new interest in the area, and sort of a revival there. When we talk about grape growing in these Baltic countries, what we're going to get into is really the climate. So it's very hard to grow things in cool climates. And there's a grape that has become very well known, Zilga, which was created on the Sabila Hill by Paul Sukatnieks. And that grape is grown not only in Latvia, but in Lithuania, Estonia, and Sweden, and Norway, and Finland. So that's sort of the history there. More recently in Latvia, Raimons Tomsons won as the world's best sommelier. So this is an international competition. They take the best sommelier from every country, out of 65 different countries, and then they also add 3 other winners of the best European competition, the best African competition, and then overall there's one more competition. And so, yeah, the 2023 was the last time they did it. They only do it every 3 years. It is a 4-day-long competition. They have semifinals, finals. So it's quite a big production and a very big thing for somebody from Latvia to win. This is the first time anybody from any of the Baltics has won. But actually, an Estonian also made it to the finals of the European competition in 2024. And Raimons also won that in 2017. So there's definitely interest, I think, not just in the growing, but in wines in general in the Baltics. And this is a nice way to see that. They're lucky. They're so close to all these incredible wine regions and have the possibility to go explore them, to taste the wines, and to learn about them. I thought also what was quite interesting was that one of the questions in the competition that Raimons won was, where is the northernmost commercial vineyard in the world located? From my research, it is no longer in Latvia, but for a while, Latvia did have the most northern open-air vineyards. Now my understanding is that they are in Norway. So just to put Latvia in Lithuania and Estonia on a scale of wine-growing regions. France, the biggest wine producing country in the world, makes 60 million hectoliters of wine. Latvia and Lithuania are probably similar, around 100,000 to 300,000, but due to Lithuanian legislation, most of it is still sold under the counter. Estonia is at 50,000 to 150,000. That's a very large range, but I'm assuming it has to do with vintages. And that's 50,000 to 150,000 liters. And then I was looking at how to compare that to something that might make sense to us. So I looked at Niagara, 18.4 million liters, and Prince Edward County, which is again is a smaller growing region, but similar in the fact that it's a cold climate, hard to grow grapes, very harsh winters, so 613,000 liters. I also put Croatia on there because I was looking at what European country is the most similar in landmass and how much wine they make. So Croatia makes 69 million liters of wine on the same landmass as Latvia. Again, when we look at the amount of vineyards, there's massive differences, and Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania are quite small countries, but also the amount of grapes that are planted are not that big. And you look at the winery numbers, most of the wine that is made in these Baltic countries is not actually made from grapes, it is made from other fruits. So they're very well known for their fruit wines. And even when you look at the wineries' own websites and try and see what grapes they're growing, there's very little information. So fruit wines is what they're known for. Mead is what won in Lithuania's competition last year. So I would say it's very hard to still find a grape wine, but they all make grape wines. I just don't know how often you can find them and which vintages they do best in. So a big part of that is this global map. And when we learn about wine, the main thing we talk about as to where to grow grapes traditionally was this wine belt. So between 30 and 50 latitude, both north and south was always the ideal place to grow grapes. And this has to do with the amount of sunlight. So the length of the days and the length of the growing seasons is optimal for grape growing. So you can see Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia are quite a bit above that. And it's always interesting, too, to look at sort of where we stand in line with Toronto as well. So 50 being sort of the top ideal growing climate in history. Tallinn is at 59, Riga at 56.9, and Vilnius at 54.6. So quite a bit further north And this really does affect their growing seasons. Even if you look at where wines are grown in Prince Edward County and even in Quebec, they are in that 30 to 50 latitude. So Galileo Galilei said that wine is sunlight held together by water. And this is quite true. And so that sunlight is very important, but also temperature is a big part of that sunlight. So the length of the growing season, the length of the days, but also where these things fall. And so when you look at what is considered a cool climate for wine growing, the average growing temperature is 16.5 or below. And Lithuania, we have 17, Latvia is 13, and Estonia is 11.5. So again, it's not just the where it stands on that band, but where growing season is. And then there was a new classification in Austria between 1880 and 1940. There were two gentlemen from Austria and Germany, and they decided to look not only at the latitudes, but also at the other influences. So this is looking at the humidity. This is looking at, again, the length of that growing season by area. And that can be affected by a lot of different factors, including hillsides, winds from the different water sources, whether it's on a lake, whether it's on a river. And so this is the Köppen-Geiger climate classification, which is used for most plants in general. And if you look at this map, the green is where technically we should be able to be on the verge of growing grapes. The harshest winters are the problem still with Latvia, but you can see that Kurzeme is in the green. The islands off of Estonia are in green, and there's a part of Lithuania there as well. I think what's interesting here is that it's not just like a lateral look at the world, but especially if you look at the United States, you see how the mountains are influencing the temperature change and the fluctuation on a much larger scale. But in every single area of France, and especially why we talk about Grand Crus in places like Burgundy, it's because every hillside actually influences the amount of sunlight that we are giving those plants. And that, I think, is quite noticeable in flatter areas. It's harder to do that. So the main difficulties of growing in northern climates are the short growing periods. There's also cold springs with late frosts, wet falls, which are good for mushrooms, but sadly not so good for wine. And legislation is still something new because the way that wine is grown on such a small scale, the rules are pretty tricky, and they're not allowed to advertise or weren't allowed to advertise wine in Lithuania for a very long time. So Lithuania finally got recognized as a wine-growing region now that the climate is changing, and they're pushing to have National Wine Day on December 7th. So hopefully that'll help them. This is an example of those frosts that can happen. So this is a map of Europe from last year. And April 14th, you can see beautiful, hot, sunny days. So definitely the grapes were going into bud, starting to grow and releasing their sap. And then a week later, it is frosty and freezing cold. And like you can see in the picture here, the vines get very influenced by this frost. It is extremely damaging, and it's something that we're seeing more of in a lot of European wine-growing regions. The Loire Valley and Chablis have been very affected by this, and it has to do with not just the temperature, but also the moisture in the air. So when you get moisture in the air and you get ice over the buds or the vines, they break. And usually it affects not just the crop for that year, but for the following year as well, or it can kill the vines altogether. So I know you've been waiting patiently to taste what is in your glasses. And before we taste, you can start smelling them and sniffing them now. We're going to taste not really blind, but somewhat blind, because I really wanted you to get a sense of the difference between a cool climate wine and a warm climate wine. So cool climate, of course, influences vines with their shorter growing season, which then leads to higher acidity. There's less sugar in the wine. There is less alcohol in the wine to be converted from that sugar. And they tend to be lighter bodied. So a lot of cooler climates tend to grow white grapes or cooler red grapes. And then in warm climates, that long growing season is the opposite, right? So sugars develop really, really long. That can be converted into higher alcohol, fuller body. And acidity is something that's hard to keep in those wines, and you need the right grapes that manage to keep the acidity. So if you want to taste from left to right, so your left glass first, and then your right glass. And the left glass, even if you look at the color, it's got a lighter color to it. Priekā. Kreisais jums būs man jāpasaka kaut ko. Vai kreisais vai siltais ir cool climate? Kurš ir cool climate un kurš ir warm climate based on what you observe and what you taste? So feel free to taste them both, look at them both, and while you're tasting them, focus on which one feels lighter, which one has more acidity, which one is maybe a little bit sweeter and riper fruit characteristics. And can you, without me telling you, guess which one is cool climate and which one is warm climate? Has everybody had a chance to taste? Is our guess, what do you think the left glass is? What climate? We have very mixed answers. And on the right side, what do you think the right is? Warm. Okay, so that one's pretty conclusive. So yes, we are tasting a cool climate on the left side, and even the color is lighter. It's a little bit brighter. You can see clearly through it. And then on the right side, it's a little bit of a deeper color, but also the ripeness of the sugars are pronounced in the sense that they're giving you riper fruit characteristics on the nose, but they're also giving you a little bit more alcohol and density on the palate. So the first wine is, it's from Austria. So Austria is considered cool climate, but if you look at where it is on the map compared to Latvia, it is still in that 30 to 50 zone. The second wine is from Puglia in Italy, so the very southern part of Italy, and very hot climate, tons of ripening. The other thing that I think is interesting when you're tasting these wines, you can tell where they're from, but the first wine is a grape called Zweigelt. So Zweigelt is a hybrid grape that was made specifically for cooler climates. And the grape from Italy is Primitivo. And Primitivo is a grape that has been grown in Italy for centuries, but is originally from Croatia. So from a place that is hot and that has had this grape growing. So this grape is very used to hot climates and has managed to grow in a way that it still keeps its acidity, which is quite interesting. As long as you pick early enough, you can still get that acid with all that alcohol and that ripeness. So even though it's higher alcohol, full-bodied, there's still a really nice balance in it. How do you feel about those wines? Good? So you're welcome to drink them, enjoy them, or dump them in the little gold cups that are there. I think it'll be a couple of minutes, and they'll come around with the next two wines. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about grapes. So as a winemaker, when you're choosing what to grow in your region, the most important factor is you can't plant whatever grape you want in that climate. You have to look at what you have. And cool climates need cool climate grapes. So a cool climate grape is a grape that has a shorter maturation period. If you look at this, it kind of gives you the length of the growing day in the climate that it can be in. So a grape that is commonly known like Cabernet Sauvignon, it needs 140 to 150 days to become fully ripe. So if you're growing that in a climate, even in Niagara, we have a very hard time ripening Cabernet Sauvignon. So that's why often we'll grow Cabernet Franc, because Cabernet Franc only needs 130 days or 125 days. And that 15 to 30 days is massive when we're talking about wine, because you're going into fall, you're going into cooler periods, potential rain, potential frost. So very important to look at the growing sort of a length of your grapes. And I think this is something that they are quite aware of when they're planting grapes in the Baltics. If you look at the most common varieties, in all three countries, they are all hybrids. So the white grapes are most likely grapes that you haven't heard of. I haven't heard of a lot of them. Solaris, Sauvignon Gris, Swenson White, Gunna, Jubileum, and the reds, the very lovely famous Latvian Zilga, Hasasanski Sladki, Rondo, which is becoming quite popular, Marquette, which is now also allowed in Quebec as VQA wines, and Niagara, and Regent, which, although it's able to grow in cool climates, is giving fuller-bodied wines. Oops. And I think when we talk about hybrids, hybrids were originally created to deal with disease. So as trade became more common between Europe and North America, vines were being brought back and forth. But we have a different genus of grapes that grow in North America naturally. And so when grapes from North America were brought to France, there was a huge disease called phylloxera that started killing all of the European vines. And in order to keep these vines, or keep planting vines and not, most of the vines did die out, but what they needed to do was keep those same European varietals in a way that those grapes were still there. But it was the rootstock that was dying, so they took the North American rootstock and they grafted European varietals onto them. And you'll still see this done in Europe on a lot of plantings, and people are quite proud when they don't need to use a North American rootstock for their plantings. So the places where phylloxera didn't affect them was places that had sandier soil. And now a lot of people are grafting within their own vineyards, especially biodynamic and organic farmers, in hopes that the strength of that vine will be able to avoid phylloxera. There's also a lot of hybrid exploration with mold and mildew issues. And usually when a new growing region emerges, much like Niagara, the first thing you start with is hybrids. So in Niagara's past, there were, I think it was close to 70% of all the plantings originally were hybrid. And I think that is part of the reason hybrids get such a bad rap, is that when anybody is starting to do anything new or learn something, they don't make the best product. The vines haven't matured enough to be interesting and to have any characteristics. The winemakers are new to their craft often. And so when you put all that together, there's potential for very bad wine. But it is interesting to see that a grape like Vidal, a hybrid that's done very well for us in Niagara, found its home in ice wines. So ice wine, almost all of it is made from Vidal. It's very rare that you find other grapes that are used in ice wine. And so Vidal has become, something that we respect and really like as Ontario wine growers and wine drinkers. Hybrids are also becoming much more popular in places that are looking at sustainability. So because of massive weather changes, a lot of drought that's experienced in places like Australia, lots of wet springs that are affecting places like France. People are looking into hybrids, even established wine regions. So there's definitely, I'd say, new interest in hybrids. There's new respect for hybrids, and there's also a lot more research going into hybrids. So I'm going to go back to this slide for us to taste our next two wines. Does everybody have the next two wines? Amazing. No? Oh, mums priekšā vajag vīnu, lūdzu. Okay, so the next two wines are clearly very different. One is white and one is red. But both of them are made predominantly from hybrids. And so taste them, smell them, and give them a swirl and look at the flavor profile. And maybe I shouldn't have told you that because you might have biases. The white first. So when you look at this wine, it is like a beautiful, clear straw color. The aromas on the nose have that beautiful lemon and lime peel, but they also have a little bit more of a floral to them. And then the red wine also has these beautiful flower aromas to them, super botanical, a little bit of herbaceous notes. And I think both of these wines are very well made. So there's nice balance in them, there's good finish, and there's an interest in the flavor profile. And both of these are blends. So I think one of the other trends when using hybrids and when growing grapes in cold climate places is that you have a backup and security the more you plant. If you're just planting one grape, and in that year when that grape goes into bud, there's a frost and it kills all of it, you are in trouble. But if you plant 10 different grapes and they all have different budding times, they all have different growing lengths, then that is where you have a bit of security. So the first wine is from Germany. It is from the Moselle, so a very classic wine growing region. Very cold, very steep hills, and known for their Riesling. So they do a beautiful job of Riesling, which gets very high acidity. They often balance it with a little bit of residual sugar, but there is definitely a trend for drier wines. And I think that that is where these blends also sometimes can be like a recipe, right? Where you're balancing drier grapes with slightly sweeter grapes and able to make wines that are dry and finding that balance there instead of leaving residual sugar in your wine. So the first wine, very fun project by these younger guys who ended up in Germany and really want to showcase the German terroir and what it has to offer. But they have their Rieslings, and then they also have these wonderful blends and are not afraid to use hybrids. The second wine is actually from Nova Scotia. So I really wanted to get a Nova Scotian white too, but I wasn't able to get it in time, and I thought the German one was good enough. But, I don't have the notes here. But, so the So I switched the wines last minute. The Nova Scotian one, again, this is a winery called Lightfoot and Wolfville. The Nova Scotia wine industry is probably been on the map quite noticeably for the last 10 or so years. They really started with sparkling wines, which do well in cooler climates. Again, you don't need that full ripeness. You're looking for acidity in those wines. And they got a lot of consultants from growers in Niagara and elsewhere. And they're not afraid to use hybrids, and they're quite proud of their hybrids, which I think is very nice. So they are using blends that you still get that beautiful saltiness from the sea, so you know that it's, from a coastal place. And then you get this florality and this herbaceousness. So very, very food-friendly wines. The other thing that Nova Scotia has done, which I think is great for smaller wine regions that are emerging and trying to get on the map, is they created a label called Tidal Bay. So it was about 10 wineries that started, and they all decided to make a wine that will have a similar profile from their own grapes. So it has to be about 80% hybrids, 20% can be Chardonnay or anything else you want to plant in there, but they do have a tasting panel, and it has to taste like a Tidal Bay, so it has to have a certain amount of residual sugar and acidity, but the blend can be whatever you want it to be, and that way when you go into a store and buy a Tidal Bay bottle, even though you may not recognize the winery, you have a sense of what you're going to get. So it's a way of all the wineries supporting each other and making it from the most common grapes there. Yeah. So the white is mainly Müller-Thurgau with a little bit of Kerner. It does have some Chardonnay and Riesling in there too, but Müller-Thurgau and Kerner are the main grapes. And then the red is a blend that has Marquette in it, which was one of the red grapes that's also grown in Lithuania. And it also has, I did make notes, and I don't have them on this slide because I changed. Here we go. It's right there. Léon, Petit, Pearl, and Marquette are those three grapes. And it does have a little bit of residual sugar. That's 6 grams of residual sugar, and that is to balance out that acidity from slightly cooler climate grapes. How did you enjoy those? Nova Scotia, yeah. Yeah, I think it's fun to explore regions in that way. So there's quite a few cold climates that are becoming cool climates, and of course, the change in temperature from, in general, everything that's happening in the world. We see these effects everywhere. So places like England are becoming very popular with their sparkling wines. Nova Scotia is on the map. Quebec has really, really beautiful wines coming out of there as well. Lithuania got recognized as a grape growing region in 2021. But then also Denmark, Poland, Netherlands, all of them are making wines, and a lot of it has to do with exploring with hybrids. And once you can establish hybrids, you can grow some Pinot Noir and Chardonnay alongside or some other grapes of interest, but it gives you a little bit of a safety net and also produces interesting things in those places. So we have one more wine to taste, and then that will be it for me. I think the last thing I want to talk about is those opportunities in cold climate regions, and a lot of it has to do with innovation. You have to look for something that isn't being done elsewhere, trying new things, and a lot of those are hybrids. So in Prince Edward County, when the that wine region started, is actually a Latvian and her partner from Germany that started Wapus Winery. And everybody said they were crazy for doing it. And they've been doing it successfully for a very long time now, and a lot of other people saw it happening and continued going there. We haven't really talked much about soil type, and I think soil type is another thing that's very important when you're deciding where to plant your grapes. If you have the land and want to plant, it's important to know what you're planting on. But Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia all actually have a ton of limestone, which is sort of where, Burgundy wines, Champagnes, Chablis, they always talk about their limestone and rave about that. I think in those Baltic countries, most of it is used for construction. So I don't know how much opportunity there is to grow vines on them, but there's definitely a lot of limestone in those regions. Yeah. So ice wine, yes, a cold climate is great for ice wine. It's a lot of work. Again, labor is more expensive typically in colder climates, and ice wine does mean more work. But the Vidal grows there, and you can make ice wine from other hybrids, so definitely that's an opportunity. Yeah. Okay. Oh. Mēs gaidīsim jautājumus, we'll do them right after, so we can do them on Zoom. There's only 2 slides left, and then we'll talk about the wine, and that's it. We'll do questions. So yeah, I think sparkling wines is something that there's tons of potential and opportunity for in cold climates. I know that also places like Brazil that focus on sparkling wine, about 90% of the grapes that they grow are all hybrids. But I think in cooler climates, we can actually do some more interesting wine because of that climate that we have. The other thing is to not be afraid of blends. We talked about that opportunity. Just to have backup when you're growing so that you don't have the fear of what if. And then skin contact wines. So skin contact, also known as orange wines, are when you make white wine the way you would make red wine. And white grapes grow much better in cold climates. And another way of adding texture and flavor is by using the grape skins. So typically when you make white wine, you press the grapes and remove the skins from the juice and make the wine out of the juice. When you make red wine, you press the skins on the juice and you let them all ferment together. And that's how you get the color and that's how you get the tannins. So you can do that with white grapes. And it was often done, especially in places like Georgia, because the tannins also help preserve the wine. So if you take white wine and make it like a red wine, it is called skin contact wine, or some people call it amber, which is very appropriate, or orange wine. And so I think that's also something for people in northern climates to experiment with and try. And then also lower alcohol is very trendy right now. And if your grapes naturally aren't getting as much sugar, aren't ripening as much, you will always get lower alcohol wines. So for the younger population that's always looking for lower alcohol, it's very hard to make non-alcoholic wine because the texture comes from the alcohol. The body and the weight, a lot of that comes from alcohol. So when you're removing the alcohol, there's a lot of problems with that. I think the best non-alcoholic wines right now are sparkling wines, and that's because the bubbles are giving the texture instead of the alcohol. Great, so we'll taste the final wine. And I think then we'll be right on time. Hopefully, then we'll answer your questions. So the final wine, I was going to do it in comparison with another one, but I think if you've all had probably Pinot Grigio, yes? And typically when you have a Pinot Grigio, it is crisp, easy drinking, super light. Typically it's been filtered so that it looks almost white like water, like it's very, very light. This is Pinot Grigio. So if you look at it, you're going to notice the color is pink. There's a lot more aroma to it, and there's a lot more body to it. And that is just because it was made with the skins. So Pinot Grigio is a gray grape. It's the same grape as Pinot Gris in Alsace, which again is a very nice cool climate. Has a shorter growing season. It's related to Pinot Noir. But the grape is often, it's just the color is filtered out of it so that people get something very uniform. And so when people get Pinot Grigio, it's light and crisp. But if you leave it with the skins, it can have this beautiful color, it can have this beautiful texture, and yeah, you can see it in this bottle. Maybe if you can't see it in your glass, how nice the pink color is. So this is from Italy, it's from Abruzzo, so it is a bit of a warmer climate, so it does have a bit of residual sugar, but there's lots of skin contact wines being made in Austria, and in Germany, and even Riesling and classic varietals as well. So again, something that people are experimenting with, and lots of opportunity for a cool climate.
Thank you, Zinta. We're now going to move on to, he told me not to stand under the speakers. We're now moving on to Q&A, so please consider any questions you have, and I will take the first question.
Yes.
So, as you all know, we have First Thursdays where we have program in English and Chefing Goes Lunch. But on the 26th of February, we have the AGM. And if you are a member, on that day, you get to vote, but you also have a complimentary lunch and a glass of wine. So my question is, would you be willing to help us choose our wines for that day?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, pairing is always it's always been one of my favorite things, and when you find that perfect pairing of wine, it's so fun. And Latvian foods like sauerkraut and sausages and potatoes, I mean, those foods can be really interesting with cool climate wines, with Rieslings, and with things that have a little bit of play on texture and sweetness. So we don't have to do Riesling, but let me know what Ingo's serving.
I know what it is. It's going to be Augsteinsgults.
Okay.
So.
There you go.
Okay, challenge, right? So that's February 26th. Any questions?
And I think that Nova Scotia Red, too, is a very good example of something that works well with Latvian food, because it is a cooler climate, but it's not too light, right? Like Latvian food is still got some weight to it, even though it's simple. It's got like very few ingredients, and it's just about the purity of that ingredient. But I think when you find a nice medium-bodied wine that has beautiful acidity and some floral notes and a bit of that herbaceousness to go with all the dill, that's like the perfect pairing.
Yeah, I may have missed it earlier while we were serving, but the hybrids then are a series of grapes put together, or is there some grafting going on as well?
There is grafting, but there's a lot of it done with like pollination in a lab. So there's different ways of doing it. A lot of the cross-pollination is more where they're brushing individual berries with the pollen. But the University of Minnesota is massive in this. There's a lot of experimentation in California. And of course, there are people focusing on hybrids for hot climates and for droughts. And then there's other people that are focusing specifically for cold climate and shorter growing seasons.
Next week's guest, Mark McNamara, has the other microphone, and we have a question over there.
Yeah.
I was at, I think it's called Adomo. I don't know if you know this winery. It's in the Beaver Valley area, so it's north. It's cold, and they have vineyards there.
Yes.
And I've tasted their wines, and they're pretty great. And I just wondered about that, because that's pretty cold.
It is cold. So I work with a winery called Therianthropy, which also makes Georgian Bay wines. And it's a very challenging climate. The winters are very cold, the same as Prince Edward County. So again, when you have really harsh winters, you need to bury the vines, which is a whole extra process, because the frost will kill them if they don't have insulation. So typically they will take the soil after they cut the vines and bury the vine, and sometimes cover it with hay and other things to sort of insulate it over the course of the winter. But then the problem is that you have to dig it all out, And you can't really do that by tractor because the little branches are so delicate. So it is a lot of work, and I know they do that up there. But the cool thing about that region is that it's actually a continuation of the Niagara escarpment. So the soil type is the same, soil type from Niagara that goes all the way up there. A lot of the grapes that were grown there were really for personal enjoyment and personal use and I think experimentation. And then they found some grapes that could grow. And I think once you are okay with hybrids and grapes like Riesling that work really well in a cool climate, you can make some beautiful things. Sometimes your red might turn into a rosé on those years where it doesn't go to full ripeness. Sometimes you might have to pull out a bunch of vines. There used to be a lot of Marsanne, Roussanne, really like hot climate grapes in Niagara, and they did really well for about 10 years, and then there was a massive frost one year, and they all died, and instead of replanting them, they were replaced with more suitable grapes.
Thank you. We now have a question from Zoom, and this lets you know how people on Zoom feel as they're watching this. What were the names? It's from Peter L. What were the names of the wines you served? I listened to your talk, and I now want to taste the wines.
So the first wine was Renner Sisters Zweigelt, and Renner Sisters is a family-owned winery. Was sisters that took over from their parents, but now one sister left and a brother is combined. But they still call it Renner Sisters, which I think is quite nice since there's so many and sons. They are in Burgenland, Austria, focusing on natural wine, so no added yeast, no added sulfites, and everything in the winery is farmed biodynamically. The second wine was Tuma Cuturi Primitivo from Puglia, Italy. And this is a project that was an abandoned vineyard in southern Puglia that the family took over and asked for actually a northern winery that makes Amarones to come down and help them. The problem in Puglia is that it's so hot that it's very hard to keep acid to balance out your sweetness. And so they were like, well, who would better know this than an Amarone producer? So they got this wonderful Amarone producer that we work with to come and consult for them. Perfect, this one I don't have. And then Madame Flock, it's called Weiss A, or A Weiss. So Madame Flock is the project that I was talking about in the Moselle, mainly making Riesling, making some Pinot Noirs, and then this is their sort of white blend made from mostly hybrids. And then Fauna. So Lightfoot and Wolfville in Nova Scotia are known mostly for their tidal bay and their sparklings. They make really beautiful champagne-style sparklings. Fauna and Flora are their white and red sort of everyday mix and are at the LCBO. Their tidal bay is probably not, I think it's sold out. And then the Remoro Pinot Grigio is from a big co-op that we work with, and the family actually is known for making violin bows, but of course they live in an area full of wine, and so they started a co-op for growers to switch over to organic farming, and they make these really beautiful organic and biodynamic bulk wines, so that, again, trying to make vegan, organic, biodynamic wines available to the masses.
Okay, thank you. Oh, we have a question over here. Oh, sickly.
I was curious about the championship for sommeliers that you said the Latvian gentleman won. Who decides who's the best one? Is it knowledge of grapes? Is it knowledge of chemistry, or is it taste? What are the things that make the person the best?
So the competition, like I said, is a 4-day competition, and it involves all of those things. So there are written portions, there are blind tastings, and there is a service portion. So the written questions are a mix. of short answer and sort of more detailed answers, and they can be everything about asking, what is the most northern climate, to what is the average precipitation in a region, to what is the most common grape of some small little region. So then it goes into blind tasting, and the blind tasting portion usually has wines and spirits. I'm not sure how many wines they had to do, but probably 5 wines, 3 spirits, something along those lines. But that's what you do in every sommelier. Like, to become a sommelier, you have to do that. And then service is you serve a table. Usually you have to open an older red wine that you have to decant, sparkling wine, and you have to have the proper steps of service. And while you're serving them, and they will also, you have to ask them what they want, and they will tell you, oh, we would like Bordeaux from the finest year, or what's the best Italian wine from Puglia, or, they'll ask you a question, you choose the wine, serve it to them, and as you're serving it to them, they will continue asking questions. Oh, we're going to have the duck tonight. What do you recommend with the duck? Oh, actually, I don't like red wine. What's a white wine pairing that you would have with that? And that's how that goes.
We're coming to the end, so if we can ask these questions rather quickly and answer rather quickly.
Quick question. On the alcohol we had today, what's the volume of each of them? Because you said the colder climates are lower and the warmer climates are
So the first
higher.
one was 12.5, which for a red is, I'd say, on the lower side. The second one was 13.5. That's the fuller bodied. But actually, they do focus on making lower alcohol and wines from this region, from this winery. 10% for the German. The Nova Scotian one is 12%. And then the skin contact, white, is actually the highest alcohol out of all of them at 13.5. So again, just like perception of white versus red and warm versus cold.
Question at the back?
Yes, I'd like to know about BC wines. Does your store carry any? Say curiosity?
So BC wines, because of what now is very clearly obvious in the news, the taxation of BC wines to Ontario through consignment is still like same as if we were importing from Europe. So they end up being very expensive. The Nova Scotian wines as well. So there is a big push to get rid of that tax from province to province. We have worked with wines from BC in the past, but the pricing never really matches the quality by the time we get it, and they sell it so well there for such great prices. So,
thank you. One final question here.
Hi, Zinta. While you were doing your research, did you come across any information about Martin Wagners, who had a winery in, I think, in the around Virgil, in the Niagara area, and then he bought land in Latvia, and he's got a winery in the Subil area.
yes.
Did you discover anything about him?
There wasn't too much about him, and I don't know how much he's still doing in Niagara. But I think he's talked at one of these things before, no? It's been okay. In Niagara, yeah. So, wine, they say what do they say? Winemaking is very, very tough business, and you don't make any money off it. It has to be like a passion project, or like you grew up in that area and it's your home.
Latvia, and then he had tried to experiment with some really old grapes that had been used by some Latvian German, sorry.
I think that makes sense for Subula, right? Because they were growing things there for sure. So it'd be interesting to know more about the lineage of those grapes and what they were planting.
Thank you so much, everybody. If I could have the pouring team and the support team come up to the front, please, with Zinta, so we can take a picture of all of you. Thank you so much, Zinta.
Thank you.
Thank you to
Oh, yes.
Thank you to this team who also helped serve lunch, and we were done by 12:16, and we are very onto timing, and we're actually almost at 2. There was one more question from Zoom, which was, could we post Zinta's presentation? And we'll figure that out, but I can tell you that in tomorrow's newsletter, we will have these wines and this photo, So please subscribe by going to latvianseniors.org and make sure you get it in your inbox. Thank you, everybody. Maybe you want to step up so your heads aren't white. Yeah, there you go.
Too late.
Thank you,
too late.
everybody. We'll see you again.